And welcome everybody to our candidates forum for the 2020 election. Some of this will kind of come across as a bit scripted just because we want to make absolutely sure that everybody is heard and we're making good use of the time. We've committed to about an hour and a half. So I'll just get us started, and it'll be a little bit more spontaneous when we get into the Q&A. And I think we just want to remind people there's a Q&A box for you to write your questions. Logan's on board, so in case we need any technical assistance, he can guide us and direct us. We have the chat box available too if you want to chat. Most of all, we want to make sure that we're giving you some really quality time with our 6 wonderful candidates for board positions that will begin October 1st, 2020. So I want to welcome you again. It's great that we're all getting really good on Zoom. So hopefully this will be pretty seamless and people feel comfortable as a great collaborative sharing site. So again, I'm Chris Peck, the DignityUSA National President, joined by Melly Barber, our National Vice President, and Alan Euclid, who's a board director and the chair of the Elections Committee, who's really done an amazing job keeping all this coordinated with the support of Logan Bear, our Westminster Web Minister in general. So again, joining us are the 6 candidates for our 4 open board director positions beginning October 1st, 2020. We truly appreciate your interest and willingness to put yourselves forward. And we're looking forward to this evening's conversation and learning more about you and learning from one another. And thanks to all of you from all over the country, our members and who are joining us and participating in today's forum. So again, the purpose of the forum is to further introduce the candidates to our voting members as they prepare to cast their ballots. We'll give you some more information about that. So how we've organized our time together, there'll be a brief candidate introductions. Then the candidates will respond to 2 questions we've shared with them in advance that kind of ground us in where we are, where we're coming from in terms of leadership, our priorities, their view of their vision for the organization. So it should be a great discussion from that perspective. And then we'll have an open Q&A session, allowing our participants to pose questions to the candidates. Feel free to do that. We'll try to get in as many questions as possible. And then at the conclusion, we'll just bring it to a close and provide any final guidance or answer questions regarding the election, the balloting process, and the timeline for completing the election. So let's begin with the introductions. I'd ask that you limit your introduction to 2 minutes or less so that we can, again, manage our 90-minute time frame well. So I'll just open it up to who wants to start off and introduce themselves.
Everybody's been quiet, so I will start. I thought about this question for quite some time and decided I could answer it best by asking the question, who do you think I am? So I've asked different people and have examples of who they thought I was, and obviously I agree because I'm telling it to you today. As an Air Force education counselor, I had an airman come into my office one day and say, you know, it's like you have a sign on you that reads, trust me, because I tell you things I have never told anyone before. When I was working for the VA, my supervisor said, you are a prime example of a lifelong learner. I have never met anybody that kept on learning and curious like you are. When I worked for the Coast Guard, my EAP colleague said, I am amazed you can pull in a group of coasties and keep their attention talking about domestic violence. Even after they've had a 24-hour shift and they're exhausted, that's amazing. When I was a college instructor, one of my students said, I always come to your class even after the break. And I went, well, I expect that. Why wouldn't you come to my class after the break? And she said, I always came. You were the only one I ever came after the break because I never knew what you were going to do or what you were going to say. And it was always interesting. I am a military spouse And my current spouse is a retired Air Force nurse. We've been married 7 years after a 16-year engagement. One of the longest engagements, I suspect, on record. I don't know. I haven't, some of the new movies that are out, probably they had longer engagements. She says, I am a best friend, a protector, an encourager, and a confidant. Since this is my second marriage, during my first marriage, I was married to an Army officer and we had 4 children. So I thought I should ask them, who do they think I am, so that you'd know. And several of them, I have too many adjectives here, which really touched my heart, but one of my oldest daughters said, you're a mom, and emphasized the mom. She says, you're a mom, you're a counselor, you're a confidant. You aren't only being a mom to me, my kids, the grandkids. You are a counselor to my friends, to their friends. She would drag people to the house to ask them to ask me questions when they wouldn't ask their own parents. Well, my youngest son said, you're a roller, you roll with the punches. And when things get really tense, you get really calm and collected, which brings things back into perspective. And he gave some examples of when he was having a meltdown as a child. One of my grandchildren wanted you to know that I am witty, hilarious, easygoing, a good listener, extroverted, unique. I thought that was cute, intelligent, trustworthy. I give the best hugs and the best advice because I'm full of wisdom. So there you have it. That's who I am.
Great.
And Dignity USA, thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
I'll go. Hi, everyone. My name is Vin Testa. I am a member of Dignity Washington and have been a member since 2013. I made my rounds, or I should say I made my way up in the Dignity Washington leadership, starting with just being on the board of directors. I was appointed as vice president and then eventually elected as president, where I was honored to serve for 3 years. And so my last term ended in 2019. So I have taken a little bit of a step back for about a year or so. And now I'm incredibly excited to throw my name into the ring for the national board after attending a few national conferences and really being impressed, excited, loved in that national setting. And outside of my Dignity world, I am finishing up my 9th year of teaching high school math. So Zoom is a lot of fun for me with distance learning and everything, but I am incredibly excited. And I guess my final fun fact is that I am a proud dog dad of Sally, my red tick coonhound.
Thank you, Vin. Another teacher.
Yep.
Well, why don't we just go with this teacher theme? I'm Sam Albano, and I'm from Carmel, Indiana. I've been involved with Dignity Indianapolis since 2011, and I had the opportunity to serve a couple of years as the secretary of our National Young Adult Caucus. I can say that I was the best secretary of the National Young Adult Caucus because I was the only person who ever held that title. So you can't argue with me there. I served on the board from 2015 to 2017 and stepped down to take on some other projects. I also was very privileged to deliver the homily at our conference last summer in Chicago, so some of you might know me from there. For my day job, I'm a public school teacher in Indianapolis. I'm just finishing 10 years. I've taught 2nd and 3rd grades. And in 2018, I was blessed really, to be named a Teacher Creativity Fellow with the Lilly Endowment. And that took me to Italy and Malta to pursue some personal and professional dreams there. And one of the things that I wrote into that grant was that I wanted to meet LGBTQI Catholics in both of those countries. And I did that. And I'll tell you, Italy made me very grateful to be a member of the American Church. And Malta made me really wish that we could be as far along as they are there. So some wonderful international friendships that I made within our movement there. I was not planning to run for the board this year. It really hadn't even crossed my mind. But I was approached by a few people in January and February who I guess think that they value what I have to say and like me being in charge of things, which is not universally true. But I was, that was very humbling, and I was very grateful for that. And in my experience, when you're asked to serve, you have to take that invitation very seriously. And so this is my response to that. And I'm really happy to be here with all of you this evening and talk to you about my vision for Dignity USA and answer your questions. So thank you to all of our members who have joined us from across the country.
Thank you, Sam.
Hi, my name is Peggy Hayes. I'm from the Boston area and a member of Dignity Boston since 1992. I think I've held every leadership position there is in the Dignity Boston chapter, most of them a couple of times at least. I'm very proud to say that I follow in the footsteps of great leaders like Marianne Burke and Lourdes Rodriguez Nuguez, and have personally experienced being voluntold that I'm going to be doing something. I have enjoyed working on the Dignity USA board this past term. It's been wonderful. It was so exciting to be serving on the Dignity USA board as Dignity turned 50. And that incredibly powerful gathering we had in Chicago was so meaningful because it really made me aware that we were not guaranteed to survive as an organization. And we have survived because of the love, the blood, and the sweat and tears of people who have given so much to this organization, who get forgotten. But over time, what they have created is something that is very lasting and is deeply needed. So that's the reason I'm running for re-election. I'm very honored to have been involved in a lot of the communications work. That's the field I work in. I work in communications at Northeastern University in Boston, and I like to think that I can bring a lot of my professional skills into that work. I'm learning a lot about how to stretch those skills for a small nonprofit. And I think the opportunity for us to grow is extraordinary because our message is so needed. So I think the ways that we are inspiring each other to look at the ways that Dignity USA can respond to the challenges of the world right now are the reasons that I want to be serving. And I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy.
Hi, I'm Kenneth Dowling. I live in San Francisco. From 2012 to 2015, I was a member of Dignity Washington, living there. I was very active there on the board and the executive committee, and I really, those members will let you know that my participation there helped kind of revitalize the young adult group and modernize the community, update the community, and really grow it. And I also felt really nurtured and grown by that community. In-person Dignity community is so important. Then I moved across country to San Francisco, and I started a PhD in clinical psychology. It's where I'm actually studying religious homophobia and LGBT mental health. So I'm actually studying, and I promise that none of you have been my secret subjects, research subjects. But so that's my dissertation's on that. So I bring kind of a mental health and a research expertise to our national community. I've worked with LGBT young adults, LGBT older adults, LGBT clients of all ages. And so then while I've been in San Francisco, I've been volunteering and participating at Most Holy Redeemer, which is the majority LGBT Catholic parish in the Castro. So, and I've been working with both young adults there in the young adult group and older adults as the chair of the acolytes. So I like to think that I kind of straddle between Dignity, our group of rebels, and then the institutional church. And so I want to, work, bring all of these perspectives to our community, and I think that's it for now.
Perfect. Thank you, Ken.
I am Chris Franke. I am currently live in Irving, Texas. I've been a member of Dignity for almost 25 years. And up until the time I moved to Irving, which is a suburb of Dallas, have never lived anywhere near a Dignity chapter. And of course, after I moved to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the Dignity Dallas chapter folded. And so I'm still nowhere near a actual Dignity chapter. I was asked to be involved or considered being involved with the board of directors, and for several years, and up until recently, it was not a feasible option. My current work position, I have worked for 25 years for Verizon in their security legal department. And it's always been very, a lot to do. And I've gotten where I'm more controlled of things like, no, I need to focus more on myself and outside the work. And I'm happy that my company has always supported that. And that's about it.
Oh, wonderful. You can see why we're excited about our candidates. All amazing people who bring many gifts and enthusiasm and commitment to our work and to the work of the board. So I'll turn it over to Ellen.
Gotta unmute myself. Thanks. Well, thanks everybody. Yeah, we've got quite the group of panelists here. And we are pretty much still on time schedule. So if you can continue to keep your answers that compact, we will continue to be on schedule. We've got 2 questions that I sent to the panelists ahead of time so that they could prepare their answers before we get into the questions from those of you watching at home. So the first one, and Logan, this is where if you can share your screen, I'll be referencing those priorities. Great. So Dignity USA has 4 overriding goals in our strategic plan, which probably most people on this webinar have heard about or seen. So we are committed to these 4 goals that you see on your screen: amplifying our prophetic voice to embrace global leadership, connecting in new ways across communities, members, allies, and broader audiences, ensuring our future vitality and optimizing our available human resources, and nourishing all LGBTQI ally life experiences and identities with educational resources. So those are our focuses. And I just want to ask the candidates, to which of these do you feel that your specific gifts or experiences will help you to contribute best, and how, while you're on the board?
I could start. The 4th priority there, nourishing all LGBTQI and allied life experiences and identities, particularly that piece with educational resources, I think is incredibly important because our community is ever evolving, and inclusion is such an important piece because it's important for us as members of that community to be educated first on our community, on identities, on expressions, on orientations, so that we can truly be the inclusive organization that we want to be, and that we claim to be. So I personally have, for the past 9 years, in addition to being a teacher, have been an LGBTQ liaison within DC public schools. And that was not an intentional cutoff of the acronym. That is actually the position title. So I don't want to be exclusive there. But the liaison position allowed me to receive training and professional development around working with LGBTQ youth, and educating myself on identities, expressions, and orientations, and then bringing that back to the school level for my colleagues. And I was very lucky to have leadership within my schools to allow me to provide that professional development and create those seminars and those trainings. But then recently I've begun taking that training and those seminars to a more public audience, and have presented at the Notre Dame Mission Volunteers of America conference, as well as at my hometown public library in Wallingford, Connecticut, for their Pride series in June. So I feel like I could provide a whole lot of educational resources and hopefully some inclusive training, because I think anyone, myself included, could always use a little bit more education on inclusivity and understanding and appreciating and respecting every experience within the LGBTQI community.
Thanks.
I'll go next.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Thanks. I forgot to mention that this will be part of my answer, but that I was also in leadership of the Young Adult Caucus for 2 years for Dignity USA. So I think that that goes with priority number 3. And I had a lot of experience for 2 years building community online, virtually, remotely for our younger members all over the country, organizing social media, conference calls, organizing our retreat, and organizing our presence at the conference, along with 2 other co-leaders. So I think the skills and experience I have for the Dignity USA Young Adult Caucus, I can bring to Dignity USA as a whole, especially in the era of coronavirus. I think that, working with, I also want to talk about priority number 2, connecting with allies and other communities. I've worked, every year for 3 years, I've gone to the Q Christian Fellowship Conference, which is a queer, mostly Protestant Christian conference. And I think we could have much more of a bigger presence among other queer Christian groups. I think we can work with Latinx LGBT groups because the U.S. Catholic population is now at least 1/3 Latino, Latinx. I can also work, I'm connected to the Religion and Faith Division and the LGBT division at the American Psychology Association. So bringing more of a mental health and well-being aspect to our Dignity community. And I think there are also new LGBT Catholic groups. One of them is Vine and Fig, online communities, blogs. I really want to connect us to those queer Catholic groups that are more geared towards young people and the online presence. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi. I feel most drawn to priority number one. It's what I've been working on. It's what I do in my professional life. But I'll just give you a brief vignette for why it's so important to me. I've done a lot of work here in Massachusetts. I was a volunteer and a volunteer trainer for an initiative called Yes on 3 in Massachusetts, which was working to protect a public accommodation, non-discrimination protection for transgender individuals in Massachusetts. It had passed the legislature, and there was an attempt to take it back at the ballot box. And I met hundreds of people and knocked on thousands of doors and had extraordinary conversations with people. And part of it, I think, had to do with the fact that a middle-aged woman in glasses does not look threatening when they're standing on your doorstep. So people open the door and talk to me, and that was wonderful. And sometimes in my longer conversations, either with other volunteers or trainers or with people on doorsteps, I talked about the fact that this work was rooted in my faith as a member of Dignity and as a Catholic woman, lesbian, who identifies with this as a broader social justice movement. And the most crushing thing for me to hear from a lot of people who were very open to the work that we do, and this being Eastern Massachusetts, either were Catholic or were Catholic at one time, was to hear them say, gee, I've never heard of Dignity. And that's crushing to hear, given how long we've been around and what great work we've been doing. And so whether people are ever going to associate with us, if they are ever going to participate in our activities, they've got to know who we are. And we need to be part of that broader picture of people understanding where we fit in to the larger social justice movements that people really care about. So that's primarily where my work has been so far. And I'm very excited by the opportunity of us being involved with the global network of Rainbow Catholics, because I think that's an opportunity for us to globalize our message.
I think for me, also the first priority about raising our prophetic voice really speaks to me. And communication has really always been, I think, has always been a strong suit of mine. Last May, as the Employment Non-Discrimination Act was working through the U.S. House of Representatives, I had the opportunity to join with HRC and local small business to represent Dignity Indianapolis in meeting with Representative Susan Brooks. She is a Republican who represents the 5th District of Indiana, which is where I live. And in that meeting, I shared with her staffer that 72% of American Catholics support non-discrimination laws for the LGBTQ community. And I knew then that we had struck a chord, because the staffer put her pen down and looked like she was going to fall out of her chair. And then the next day, the news broke that the House of Representatives passed the bill. And shortly after that, I received an email from her chief of staff, whom I had met the day before. And she said, I just want to tell you that I enjoyed our meeting, and Representative Brooks voted in favor of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. She was one of very few Republicans to do that. I'd like to think that our meeting helped to move that needle a little bit. Our messaging is so strong with our members, with our allies, with others in the Catholic social justice movement. But we have to continue to think about ways to expand that message and continue to bring that to external places. We have a lot of quiet and hesitant allies sitting in the pews of our Catholic parishes. How are we able to bring our message to them? The demographic shifts with regard to religion in our country show that we need to continue building secular allies in this movement. And finally, how do we engage with those whom we deem to be our opponents? That's also part of our messaging and an important part of our messaging. And by thinking about our message and tailoring it to our different stakeholders and our different groups, we engage other people in our work. We find new funding sources, which is just a reality that we have to think about. And we build bridges with people. And I have nothing against James Martin, but I want to say that I use that phrase in reference to our movement about 2 years before he did. So communication and messaging really brings people together, so and helps them join with us in our work. So I'm very excited about that particular priority.
I also was focused in on several of them, but the connecting across communities or connecting has been a great part of most of the life experiences I've had, being an educator and a social worker and doing direct delivery. I'm sitting in a very conservative state. And so my activities have been kind of like infiltration. And I took it upon myself to go to our pastor in confession, in case he gets challenged about this, that there's some gay lesbian lady that's actually a Eucharistic minister. I didn't want him to be sideswiped. And he's a wonderful pastor. And I actually talked to him about running for this, because if he got into trouble with the Archbishop, who is again very conservative. So I've approached both of the priests. I'm also active in a retreat ministry in the parish. And my ex sisters, that when I've been on X teams to put on the retreats, and now I'm on the core, which is like a board of directors for the retreats, they all know that of my orientation, and I'm not getting anything negative back. Well, to me, that's like how I can recruit allies. And we have a small Christian community that we meet every couple of weeks with, and all of the ladies in that group. And they're like, when Francis and I came out, or I think they knew, but when we actually said that we were a lesbian couple, we didn't get any too negative, other than you really need to be careful, because there Opus Dei people in the parish might be coming after you. So my communication has been pretty much one-on-one. Let's kind of infiltrate. And I think we can reach our members. I'm going to call it the old new way. Remember when there was such a thing as a telephone, and you actually picked it up and talked to somebody? I appreciate every year getting my letter from Dignity USA and saying, we loved having you as a member, and would you increase your donation and renew? And I'm also part of the American Counseling Association and have presented at their conferences. And one of the presidents used to pick up the phone, and there's like 10,000 members, just out of the blue, call members. And I thought, that would be really rare. We're working really hard on technology, and that's really important. But if we did some of the old new stuff that we just reach out to people randomly, or to organizations that we're trying to target, to talk about what the missions and the goals and what we can do for you lately kind of idea, I think that's where I might fit the best. Thank you.
Yeah, I kind of focused in on the, connecting through communities, members, allies, and that reaching out to and our allies, and just presenting our story, our experiences, and to borrow Sharon's phrase, infiltrate. We can show that we're not much different than they are, and as Sam said, the majority of the people in the pews do support a lot of the positions that we hold, and to reach out and cross the communities to our members and to our family members or to our coworkers who may know we're gay but not know we're Catholic, which is, family members, they may know we're Catholic but not know we're gay necessarily. But I think that's one of the things that I would like to see and work on, is reaching out to the communities, presenting our positions, and becoming a presence out there. And even if those that do not support us, you do learn from those positions and know how to adjust and come forward to it in the future.
Thanks, everybody. That's great. Got a lot of connectors in the room. So just a reminder to the people watching, we do have one more scripted question that people are going to speak to kind of quickly, and then we're going to jump into your questions. So there's a button, should be a button on the bottom of your screen that says Q&A, and you can just type your question in there so that we can see it and ask it. We won't be able to hear your voice to ask it, so you need to type it in the Q&A or the chat box if you can't find the Q&A, and then we will ask those questions coming up next as time allows. And we are scheduled to go until 9:30, so we still have plenty of time for questions, hopefully. So our second question that the panelists prepared for is a little bit more specific. This pandemic that has taught us all to use Zoom has disrupted our lives in other ways too, the ways we live, work, and worship. So what do leadership and ministry look like right now, and how do you envision Dignity dealing with the ways that this has disrupted our work and our lives? Don't all talk at once.
You caught me reaching for the button, Ellen. What I have been so impressed with the way church looks now is the creative use of technology, and that it's being used so effectively that it's reaching into people's homes and into people's hearts. I've been attending the Dignity New York liturgy each Sunday evening. And San Antonio chapter of Dignity has a noon mass on Sundays. And then on Saturday night, our parish is broadcasting mass. So I'm actually going to mass and liturgy more now than I would normally do in a normal week. Then the Dignity women also have a conversation every Monday evening. And that has been really fun and allowed us to get to know each other and branch out, because being in San Antonio, the people that are in the Dignity Women group, I only see every couple of years when I've been at the last several conferences. I think this new, the new church that we have is a term I heard today called shape shifting. So the shape of church is shifting in that it's becoming more personal and more inclusive, and people are tuning in that maybe would not tune in, in the past. We're taking the idea of celebrating liturgy to a broader, our worldview is getting larger. But we're speaking with people across continents. I think we need in the future for Dignity, we may need to look at a virtual convention next year and make plans to have it that way if it's necessary. I know a lot of the national organizations, not necessarily in the secular arena, they're podcasting and doing things of that nature. And also, I love the Dateline, our newsletter. I'd like to propose the possibility of a virtual broadcast of that reflection rather than just on paper. So, thank you.
Chris, go ahead. Never mind.
Yeah, I think as Sharon pointed out that the things have been changing in the fact that you now have stuff broadcast either, some churches are doing it on Facebook Live, others are pre-recording it and putting it on YouTube, or as Dignity New York has been doing is through a Zoom, that this is reaching out to the fact that we can't be together, but it also is reaching out to those who cannot, for whatever reasons, physically or work-related, attend a Dignity Mass, that they can still participate. If their health does not allow them to be around people, they can still be participating and feel a part of. And I think that this is something that people are realizing that it is something that can be done. I know prior to COVID-19, I was always one of these that did not like working from home. I would say, I want to go into an office. I've been doing working from home for 2 months now, and it's not that bad. But, things can be developed, and reaching out to others and having that online presence, you can reach other people that might not necessarily reach out. You might not reach out to them because they can, in the privacy of their home, experience Dignity masses and see that it's not so bad, and then eventually will attend a local chapter mass. And I think that will increase our reach into the other communities.
I want to shout out both Dignity New York and Dignity Washington for their online masses, because it looks like that's what we're going to be doing for a little while, which I'm totally for. I think the way that it's been done, either through Zoom or through the pre-recorded, is incredibly helpful, particularly for those who don't have a local chapter to go to on a regular basis. So this is kind of, if anything, this isolation has been a bit of a blessing for our national movement, because we have allowed those people who don't have local chapters to truly be involved in our community on a regular basis, and not having them wait every 2 years or every year for either a young adult convention or a national convention. One thing that was implemented within the past few years in Dignity Washington was a committee on aging, because we do have a very large aging population that is so important to keep in contact with, particularly for those who live by themselves and may not have family nearby. So I think our ministry and our leadership over the next few years, and especially during this time, is a sort of checking in on our members, on people who are by themselves and who during this time are probably going absolutely crazy, myself included. My dog is only so helpful. So I think our ministry is going to start looking like either phone calls or Zoom calls or something that will keep us together while we have to be so far apart. And I appreciated Sharon's comment about the leader, just picking up the phone every now and then and checking in on people. I think if we have some sort of process or subcommittee or volunteer opportunity to be checking in on one another, I think it'll keep us all healthy and hopefully a little bit sane. during this time.
One benefit of this time is that what we've been doing over the phone or by email, a lot of us are now doing by video chat, which I think is a really, actually an improvement over older communication, because we can actually see each other. So I can see like just having more video conference meetings with other allies and stakeholders and communities. On the education front, we can have, I know that some communities like Dignity Washington have a speaker series, and we can, through video conferencing, we could extend these educational opportunities to the whole of Dignity USA. And I also see, the Dignity Young Adult Caucus, we at least when I was leader, one of the co-leaders, we had monthly caucus calls. And so I think we adopted this remote like transcontinental caucus community experience years ago, which now we can start to bring to the whole Dignity USA. I also think that, this like suspending in-person masses is really letting us reconsider like what is dignity without community mass. Are some people able to go to their local parish, and then Dignity has local chapters have a monthly meeting that's more like a support group or an advocacy group or an educational group. What is Dignity in-person meeting going to look like after the pandemic is over? This is a really like transformative time where we can really reconsider what our in-person local communities look like.
Our world has changed so rapidly this year. 11 weeks ago, I was parading 22 second graders through the Children's Museum. And today I'm wishing that I knew more about video production and wardrobe selection and children's digital entertainment. We're connecting online and doing all kinds of things online that maybe haven't been done before. There will always be a person-to-person part of our ministry, and that's something that we can't forget. But to be honest, from my perspective as Dignity, we do have some catching up to do with technology. I'm very grateful to our board that has been looking very hard at digital engagement and starting to do some work in that area. When I was on the board last, we implemented the e-newsletter, which I think in retrospect, we didn't know what a great thing that was at the time when we moved to that. And certainly our chapters, particularly Dignity New York and Dignity Washington, have done a great service with technology. So we're seeing all of the ways that it brings us together, that it builds engagement, that it disseminates our message more effectively. One of the great Sam quotes when I was on the board, or at least I think it was a great quote, I said one time, "Don't tell me what the computer can't do. The computer works for us." And so I'll always bring that perspective to the board, that we need to be leveraging and utilizing our technology to the best of our ability. But more importantly than that, during this time, we can talk about these great ideas, and we never have a shortage of great ideas in our organization. But I think the most important thing for all of us is to remain grounded in a spirit of discernment and prayer. And I hope to bring that with me if I have the privilege to serve on the board. The Holy Spirit really is at the center of everything that we do, whether it be our worship or our ministry or even our planning and budgeting and fundraising. We're not an NGO, and not anything against NGOs, but we are an ecclesial community. We are an expression of church. And so I think we find ourselves like many of the saints in other times, that we have this same good news that hasn't changed, but we're in new circumstances and we're in a different era. And so we have to find ways to adapt to that era and those circumstances And I think if we act with faith, and if we act with prayer, and if we act with that perspective that we are an expression of church and we are the presence of Christ, I think this pandemic doesn't know what it's come up against.
I was really enjoying listening to everybody do the sort of bi-level problem solving. What do we do about the present moment, and where are we going? Which are the two key strategic questions for us as a board. And what we do in the present moment, from my perspective as a board member, is we figure out how to keep our 50-year-old organization alive in a time when a lot of nonprofits, unfortunately, are going to fail. So it's going to take ingenuity and creativity and flexibility and all of the great ideas that we can come up with to not only do the work of nurturing our community, but also do the business of our community. So I'm committed to that work, and that involves all of us. But I also think that it will be an opportunity for us, as we see all the wonderful things that this has wrought, all the terrible things, but all the wonderful things, for us to examine how do we change out of all of this. One of the most watched episodes from FaceTime of our conference in Chicago was the Eucharistic liturgy. And it was really accomplished by somebody holding up a cell phone during the whole Eucharistic liturgy. And then people watched it on Facebook. So it's not really necessarily about the technology. It is about bringing what we do in smaller spaces to a larger community. And no matter what happens when this is over, and a lot of us return to churches, church buildings, because we've always been the church, whether we're in the building or not, we're going to have some sort of offering, some sort of engagement or outreach to people who want to connect with us spiritually and liturgically, in addition to all the other ways that they are through activism and advocacy and through education. So we have the challenge of how do we survive this time? And we also have the opportunity to think, how do we take all the wonderful things that we've learned, the lessons from this terrible time, and apply them to make our organization continue to thrive?
Thanks, everybody. So with all those great ideas on the table, we have a few questions that have been added to the Q&A box. People can keep adding their questions as they come up, although we do have just about 30 minutes left for those. So I'm going to hand it over to Melly, who will be able to read the questions off, and candidates can just jump in if you have an answer or if she calls on you. But we won't hear from all 6 of you on all the questions. Go ahead, Molly.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. And thanks to everyone who has been submitting questions. Again, if there is something you'd like to ask, you can enter that into the Q&A box, and I'll make sure to ask it to our candidates. So the first question that came in says, Dignity has come a long way from its years as an all-volunteer organization to now much of the work being done by paid staff. What thoughts do you have to get more people visibly involved?
A volunteer career fair, a volunteer opportunities, shop for your next volunteer gig opportunity on Zoom. We can have all of the committees present their plans for the year, and we can recruit volunteers.
I think it's important to recognize that, like, right now there is already so much volunteering going on. I mean, you think about these virtual masses and all the people who have volunteered to read and to do the production and to do all of these things. So there are, we clearly know that there are people out there who want to volunteer and who want to assist with keeping our organization alive. So I think I'll definitely echo Peggy with a volunteer career fair. I think that's wonderful. But also, I mean, some sort of survey, some sort of opportunity for people to speak up on what they feel comfortable volunteering for. You can't just expect it. And I do wonder a little bit about the part of the question that said, so much of the work is being paid for. I would partially disagree on that, just because I think we have some phenomenal people who are being paid. But again, so much of the work, particularly of the board and particularly of within the individual chapters, is volunteer based. And you think about the national convention coming up next year, no matter how it's going to be, that's a group of volunteers. So I think it's just a matter of bringing people. I appreciated the word visible in that question, because I think so much of it is happening invisibly right now.
Does anyone else feel called to respond to this question before we move on to our next?
I think that as a member of Dignity for many years, I'm not aware of what opportunities there actually are. And I think Peggy's idea of putting a career fair on really would hit that, because as I was looking at the strategic plan also, I thought there's sub lists of what goes on to support each one of those priorities. So there's committees that have support needs. And I think maybe if people were more aware of what they are, we would have more people that are visible. I think Vin tested it, touched on it, being there's a lot of people doing things. They're just not as visible as I think it'd be appropriate to have.
Thank you. Our next question is specifically for those who have previously served on the Dignity Board. So I think this question is for Peggy and Sam. For those who have previously served on the Dignity USA Board, how did you positively contribute during your previous term, and what specific things do you look forward to helping the organization accomplish now that you weren't able to before?
That's a great question. During my 2 years that I was on the board, one of the areas that we were working on at that time was the revision of our bylaws, which was started under our leadership and finished under the next board. And I think as part of that process, I think that I contributed in a valuable way. I was a little bit of a skeptic, honestly, in some of the conversations as we were going through, just with wording and phrasing and making sure that we were expressing what we thought was important and how our organization should run into the bylaws. And I think some of that resistance led to it taking a little bit longer. And I think the positive outcome of that is that we have a very good set of bylaws, which our members just approved last year by a very big margin. So I think that was an important project that we worked on during my years on the board. Also, I was able to be a little bit of a bridge with the Young Adult Caucus during that time, because I had come up through the leadership of that caucus and onto the board. And so I think during those years, I was able to represent the voice of the Young Adult Caucus and then also represent the board to the Young Adult Caucus and work with the leaders. At that time, Kenneth was one of the leaders. So I think as far as something that I didn't really get to do during that time was work with our development committee, and I have joined the development committee since. And I really hope to continue serving on that committee and looking for new sources of funding and new ways to reach out to allies who are Catholics and also in the secular world.
My work has primarily been in the communications area, working with my co-chair Martine Witchker on the communications committee. And some key things that we did were we created and managed the website and the conference booklets for the Dignity USA conference in Chicago. If you recall, that was a much bigger conference booklet than we've ever had before in celebration of our 50th anniversary. It really was something that people could keep and hold on to as a record of our history with all those wonderful tributes. Also have worked with the board and the staff on really analyzing where we are in terms of our digital assets and our digital strategies, engaging a consultant, and have been part of the interview process for a new digital strategist position. I would say the work that I would like to continue to do, because I see them as linked together, a lot of it is under priority number 3, which is ensure our future vitality and optimize our available human resources. We really do see an expanded digital strategy as being part and parcel of us growing financially and thriving. And that is one of the ways that we are going to, as an organization, optimize our human resources. So bringing in the additional funding, either from grants or from individual gifts that support our mission and stretch our human resources further.
Okay, thank you both. Our next question says, in your view, what is the next step for Dignity? Well, there certainly are still challenges within the institutional church. We see a shift in attitude toward the LGBTQ+ community. What will be, for you, the point of relevance for Dignity USA in the future?
I think that even though many people, particularly family members of LGBTQ+ children, are more accepting, there are still vast areas, particularly, being from the South, in which the Catholic Church in the South is still very conservative, and the members are still very conservative, and having that voice out there to be a point of contact for some of these, the youth, to know that they can be Catholic and gay at the same time. I know several people in which they work in the church. They're very accepting of their gay and lesbian children, but they know those children are no longer part of the church, because that's, here in the South, that's not where it's not as accepting to be. Where you have here in Dallas, the largest LGBTQ church in the, it's not a Catholic church, it's the largest church in the world, where most of the gay Catholics are now at that church because they're accepting. So still having that, that beacon to the people out there as they come out or realize that, like I said, you can be gay and Catholic at the same time.
I think no matter what, and Chris mentioned the South, but as somebody who grew up in Connecticut, I feel welcome. Let me not say welcome. I feel allowed to walk into my hometown Catholic church where I was baptized, received communion, and was confirmed. But that doesn't necessarily mean I feel accepted. And to this day, I only walk through the doors on Christmas Eve to appease my grandmother. So I think we'll always, I think for the very foreseeable future, we'll always have issues with the institutional church. And so I don't necessarily think that our end goal should be to put ourselves back in there. I think our goal, no matter what, no matter when, no matter how, is to be a resource for people who identify as LGBTQ plus and Catholic at the same time. Whether that be through education, whether that be through our masses, whether that be through our conventions and meetings. We need to be the example for other LGBTQ plus identifying people out there that, you know, we do exist, and as an organization that perhaps could use to, I shouldn't necessarily put that on the word need in there, but could use to attract the younger generations, so that we have an organization and a movement to be behind in the future. I think our main goal should be to kind of update ourselves while also honoring the experiences and the history that we come from, while showcasing our pride in both our LGBTQ plus identities and our Catholic identities.
I think the church changes very slowly, and that in the 50 years that Dignity has been around, Dignity is a force of consistency, consistently gathers with other allies, uses legal means to keep the pressure on the church. And I don't know if we'll ever come to the point where 100% of the Catholic pew sitters are going to say, yes, we should have gay and lesbian people in ministry and married priests and all of the other issues that relate to inclusivity. But an organization needs to be there to keep the pressure on. And I think Dignity does that with the forces that we now have, and especially the younger people in I'm aware of, the Catholic youth that I'm aware of. They're very accepting. Our teen youth group in our parish has LGBT teenagers in it, and they don't seem to be upset about that at all. So I think that as we keep the pressure on the church, and as the church matures in the next 30 or 40 years with the young people that we have, we will have a whole new Catholic Church that really exemplifies the spirituality of Jesus and carries us. So I think that's where our point of keeping the pressure on, and that's where our relevance comes.
Thank you. As we move into our next question, I just want to make sure all of our candidates have the chance to have their voices heard. So if you have not been able to answer a question recently, please feel free to jump in. So our next question says, as we move to affiliate with alternative groups, potential allies, do you think we risk losing a sense of our own identity?
I'd like to answer this question. I think that my generation, both LGBT and straight, is overwhelmingly secular, and so as I see it, the queer, trans, Christian, and religious space is very small, and it might even be shrinking. And so we need to stick together. We need to find each other. So I'm not sure if this question is about affiliating with LGBT Protestant groups or LGBT secular groups, but I think that being networking and being in this kind of in the same boat and in communication with other groups is what's going to keep us alive, what's going to keep us vibrant, what's going to keep us in the loop. People will refer to each other to us as the gay Catholic organization. And so we need to have a stake in that by keeping ourselves relevant with these alternative groups. And that includes queer Catholic groups within the church that are, have not been expelled from the church like we have. And, all kinds, every connection is beneficial to us at this point. We need allies.
Anyone else like to respond to this question as well?
Well, if nobody else is speaking up, I think that's the only way to hold on to our identity, as Kenneth was saying. I think once we hold on, I think when we say losing part of our identity, I think that could have been specific to the Catholic piece, or I suppose it could be the LGBTQ plus piece if we're talking about letting ourselves be welcomed back into the institutional church. But as I mentioned in the previous answer, I think Dignity USA is always going to have a purpose. And whether that purpose evolves into a more educational or advocacy purpose, then that's fine. But we're always going to have the purpose of being representatives of the LGBTQ plus and Catholic communities. So again, I think it just enhances our identity as we enter these other spaces. If we enter other queer religious spaces, then saying, we want to hold on to our Catholic tradition and that's important to us. And how is it similar to yours? But if we enter what are traditionally heterosexual spaces, then holding on to the fact that we are proud, we would like to be recognized as same-sex couples in terms of sacraments. We would like our opportunity to participate in things and be Eucharistic ministers. The identity is what's gonna power us through all of it.
Thank you. Our next question came through our chat box. It says, Marianne speaks of dignity as a movement. This seems to be a, quote, step up from thinking of us as an organization. What do you think?
I'd like to respond to that. And I think I used this phrase earlier. We are even a step up from a movement. We are an ecclesial community. We are an expression of church. Maybe we could call it an ecclesial movement. Where we are, where dignity is, the church is there. That doesn't mean the entire church or perhaps the church in its fullness, but the church is there. And when is the church ever expressed in its fullness on earth? That would be something unfathomable. So there's power that comes with that. And there's responsibility that comes with that also. Recognizing that we are people gifted with the Holy Spirit for what purpose? Well, for worship, for ministry, for social justice, for being the presence of Christ in the LGBT community, in the Catholic Church, in the world. So I think even movement by itself is too limiting. We are church.
I would like to add that I believe we are all those things that Sam said, but I believe we are also movement, because the beauty of a movement is anyone who likes the direction that the movement is headed in can join the movement. We're not checking identities. We're not checking people's beliefs at the door. We're asking, if you see the justice where we're going, come and join us. And so in the tradition of great movements, the peace movement, the LGBTQI rights movement, civil rights, the environment, all of those things, people bring their full selves to it and they grow. And when people bring their full selves to a movement, they grow the movement. So I happen to be in love with that word. I happen to believe that everybody wants to affiliate with a movement at some time or another, because it expresses something that we long to do in community. And it's a type of work which can look a lot like an organization, and it's a type of work that can look like a church, but I believe it's also a movement.
I think the word movement, it connotes social justice, it connotes protest, it connotes change. It's very exciting, especially for young people who are very idealistic. And for some, in some ways, the LGBT rights movement has lost steam. And I think religion is the last frontier of LGBTQ equality. So I think the word movement is very fitting. At the same time, we are the organization that keeps the movement afloat or structures the movement. So I think we can be both a movement and an organization, just like, as we've all said, the Catholic Church is.
Thank you. Our next question says, I think Dignity USA has lost their vision in regard to the individual chapters. How does, or perhaps how could, Dignity USA nurture chapters that currently exist and develop chapters in areas of the country that has no chapter?
Could I ask if the person who asked that has a chapter affiliation? And I mean, we don't, I mean, it doesn't have to be answered, but I think there's a great deal of work that's happening at the Dignity USA level to support local chapters and connect with them. Thank you. Thank you. I see the answer, Dignity Philadelphia. I think there is always an opportunity for greater dialogue between Dignity USA and local chapters about what kinds of supports and resources could be helpful and needed, and what kinds of ideas from one chapter or another region could be helpful, because maintaining the life of a small community is one of the biggest, most challenging things anyone will ever do, and it can feel really, really difficult. So point well taken that Dignity USA needs to continue to support local chapters. I will tell you the work that Bob Butts and his committee are doing to connect with local chapter leaders to understand their needs and how to connect them to resources in other chapters is really positive work, and it should be strengthened.
I've been kind of encouraged by seeing the governors of the states collaborate with each other at this time. It makes me wonder if chapters could be in more touch, more communication with each other, like a monthly president's call or something like that. I think as Peggy said, every chapter has something to learn from each other. And I think, not all chapters, like it's not one size fits all. Not every chapter is going to have a weekly mass or need a weekly mass. Like some may have a monthly mass or a weekly prayer service or more of an advocacy meeting or a spiritual prayer group. We need to think about, the diversity of chapters, and if a chapter is struggling, provide the scaffolding for them to create the kind of community. And of course, recruiting. I think that we need to really work on, most people don't come to Dignity through the national organization, it's through a chapter. And so we need to work on recruiting or just evangelizing in a way, both in the Catholic Church and in the LGBT community in order to grow our chapters. And I see that especially with young people, and with Latinx people.
I think I think that some of the data that Dignity USA already has may show that people are actually joining Dignity individually now. I think the trend is showing now that like there are not individual chapters because so many have perhaps fallen apart or whatever the case may be. I don't mean to use that language or that term, but so I think a lot of people are joining the national organization individually rather than joining a chapter. So I think if we, piggybacking off that recruitment idea, if we find people who are willing to revitalize or start or come up with these groups who do meet weekly, monthly, however often, and provide them with some sort of I guess how-to, and it sounds like that's already kind of happening on the board with some of the work that Peggy mentioned. But I think a great idea would be to kind of revitalize some sort of chapter mindset, so that that in person that we've talked about so much is so important. And being able to meet with people who are like you and who do have the same values and traditions that you hold dear is incredibly important. So I think instead of relying as much on, well, let me take that back for a moment. I think we need to find that balance of revitalizing chapters and finding people who are willing to gather, and then also keeping up with technology and future and things like that, so that we can hold events like these and broadcast our masses and our events for the greater outreach. It's got to be a balance, and I don't think that letting go of the chapter mindset is something that we could afford to do.
I'd also like to respond if there's time. I'm looking at two people on this call who really have great experience in this area, and I'm thinking of Kenneth in Dignity Washington and Melly in Dignity Indianapolis. And Melly, I am not going to take any credit for anything that you've done in our chapter. And I think in both of those cases, we saw growth and revitalization of two of our Dignity chapters. And the way it happened was through building relationships with people. And I don't think it's for the board to send someone to another city and go and plant a chapter. I think that the people who have to take that responsibility and that initiative are our members who are out there on the ground in those places. And the way that I would envision the board in that process is supporting those members and facilitating the work that they do, perhaps connecting people who are together in a metropolitan area, continuing to have our regional calls that Bob and Melly's committee have to exchange ideas, and perhaps looping people into those calls who are working to found new chapters or revitalize chapters. So I think the board plays an important supporting role, but really the people who have to be empowered are our members out there on the ground. And that is something, that's work that everyone is allowed to participate in.
Yeah, one of the things that I would like to add on this is that I think it would be helpful, and I'm not that familiar with Bob's committee and what all they have, is to, in chapters that may be struggling a bit, is set up mentors with other chapters to where they can connect up and work on ideas on, I know one of the things that happened here in Dallas was that the people, it was always the same 5, 6 people that were running for the board. Nobody else would want to run. And it just is not feasible. People get burned out. And as I mentioned before, there's they lost a lot of members to other LGBTQ plus positive Protestant churches. But I think if you're going to research, as Sam said, is have people, individuals, try to work to see if they can form a chapter and have mentors available from other strong chapters to see what did Indianapolis do to revitalize, rejuvenate their chapter, and can that be replicated in other areas or used to build chapters in other areas. So I think it's a combination of the individuals and providing support from other chapters to reach out and say, if you have questions, call me. you know, as Sharon says, pick up the phone and call.
I was wondering that if we've done an analysis of where the membership is, and there's probably been one done, and then a reach out or set up a Zoom call or some manner to connect the people in an area and see if they, in essence, what would they like to see in a chapter? Is it important to get together, you know, every 2 weeks for studying the scripture for Sunday, or would they like to have a liturgy? Are they comfortable with a priest, with a non-priest led liturgy, kind of getting the feel or the temper of that area? And that could bring it back. I wonder, when we hear about a chapter that has not been successful, what was that chapter's charism, or what charism did that chapter not have that people didn't feel the need to stay?
Thank you everyone for your answers. And thank you to everyone who's watching who submitted questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of them, but I really appreciate the thoughtful questions that you submitted, and the grace with which our candidates answered these really difficult questions tonight. So thank you to everyone. Chris?
Yeah, we'll just wrap things up. We're just perfectly on time. I hope you're feeling as excited and energized as I am listening to our wonderful candidates, and also the participation of so many folks, you know, from across the country who are participating, you know, on the sidelines, but also shared great questions. So I've been writing a lot of notes. I got lots of good ideas. So no matter what, no, I think we've got some excellent thinking on the table and some great ideas that I think absolutely we can respond to. So Marianne, I'll just sort of close things out. I just want to remind you of the voting process and timeline. So voting takes place via email and hard copy ballots. Hard copy ballots are mailed to those who do not have email and prefer, have asked us to do that. You should receive these emails and ballots over the next few days. Because of the current COVID-19 crisis and the disruption of service, and you know, everything is delayed, the mailings may, you know, take a little bit longer than normal. So just be patient with that. A reminder, only members of Dignity USA are eligible to vote. If you're not a member, it's not too late to become a member. Just go to our Dignity USA website, dignityusa.org, click on the Give button at the top, and that'll take you to the member enrollment page. But I think most people are members here. We've created, again, if you've not already checked it out, we have created a Meet the Candidates 2020 webpage on our Dignity USA website. Thank you, Logan, which includes the candidate statements, and you can also expect to see ongoing Facebook postings and reminders. The deadline for receiving your votes is June 25th, 2020. Again, we're voting. We have 4 open seats, so there are 4 people being elected of the 6 candidates. And we want to remind you that those who are receiving paper ballots, that mail service may be delayed, so you want to probably give yourself a little bit more time to respond. We've had 32 attendees. This is probably breaking a record, although of course I think we're all getting to be major Zoom people, so I think that helps. Melly, any other thoughts?
Did you say that the election results would be published in July, Chris?
No, I didn't.
I want to make sure
Thank
people
you.
know that. And then just again, a thank you to all of our candidates and to everyone who took time out of your evening to get on yet another Zoom call. We look forward to welcoming 4 new members to our board, whose term, of course, begins October 1st, 2020. As always, we encourage your continued participation in all of our work and activities, which continue to be critical to our mission and meeting the needs of our members and allies, especially during this time of crisis and difficulty. So just, Chris and I wanted to extend a huge thank you to everyone who was present tonight.
Thanks to Ellen for also being the coordinator of our elections and coordinating this evening. So
Thank you all for being here and for helping. And yeah, we'll see how the Holy Spirit works. I hope everyone votes. And I hope to see you all soon.
Yeah. Okay, good night. Be safe, be healthy, take good care. Good night.
Thank you. Good
Thanks,
night.
everybody.
Good night.
You all.